recording.
All right.
Thank you. Well, it was so nice to meet all of you. Thank you for the introductions. My name is Natasha Jankowski. I live in Champaign, Illinois, and so not too far from some of you. And I was a faculty member at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So that was why I was in Champaign, Illinois, and why I stayed in there. I wasn't like, I need more prairie and corn in my life. I want wind when I open a door. So I worked at the university. I served as the graduate program coordinator for our higher education graduate program. And I also ran the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, or NILOA, which looked nationally at how our institutions going about assessing student learning and what works for whom and in what ways, and really try to bring more or merge together the research piece with informing then how does that relate to practice, and how do we do it in a way that's not thou shalt do the following steps and then somehow by doing that you have assured quality and are good, but really think about what matters in your context, what you're trying to do, the students that you have, and provide resources and tools to help people along that journey. So I did that for quite a long time. I stepped out of that role and I still teach. I can't give it up. I'm a lecturer for New England College and Endicott College. So I do online graduate programs there, teach a quantitative course, a critical quantitative course, which is interesting because I'm not a fan of quantitative methods in most cases. They're used in ways that are detrimental, I think, to what we're trying to do as educators. And I serve as senior fellow for community colleges with Strada Education Network. And I've been doing that for about a year and really got into building out for them an area on how to support community colleges. It's a foundation in Indianapolis, if you're not familiar with Strada. And they had not done community college work before. And before sort of going, we know what's right for you. We know what you need. Instead, really thinking about how do we listen from the field, that what is helpful and useful now for institutions to really meet the challenges that they have moving forward. So that's a bit of my background. Joe, I don't know if there's anything else that you think is worth me mentioning on my journey.
I don't think so, other than the next question I have to kind of tee you up to talk is
Sure.
Sharing, your definition or what comes to mind when you think about quality assurance in higher education.
Yeah, well, this is actually a good point of something that I forgot to mention about my past. So my background is actually in philosophy. So I'm one of those like, what are you going to do with this degree in philosophy? And I was like, I don't know, anything that I want to do. I was like, I'm going to go and do assessment. I did not. I was like, I'll go into higher ed, and then I ended up in assessment. But so part of the thing that's really fascinating in our quality assurance space is we use terms in a lot of different ways that we don't really mean. And it can be processes, it can be a practice, it can be a thing, it can be something else. And it's fascinating how we do that in education, and then how we turn it into an acronym that sounds catchy at the same time. But so when I think of, I tried to answer this question for Joe, like, what is my definition of quality assurance? And it turns out I don't really think I have one. I have more of sort of things that I see of what it looks like in the field, or when people say that they think they're doing quality assurance, what does that entail? And so oftentimes it's related to some sort of review process. Ideally in higher ed, it's peer review related. So it could be accreditors, it could be a program review, it could be states, different entities in our triad can engage in that. But the piece that's often, I think, missing from a lot of our quality assurance discussions, it's to whom and who gets to choose what counts as quality, and who are we trying to assure of what, instead of kind of what does it look like and who gets to say it. And there's a ton of players in the quality assurance space. Valerie, coming from a healthcare related space, you are probably very familiar with the nexus at which you sit in trying to think about the many different stakeholder needs to address that space. So I think for me, the short version of a quality assurance process is we're trying to do something right and be clear about how we did it, and right by somebody, depending on who you ask at a particular point in time, would be my short version of that.
So the class is coming off of, and by all means, folks, feel free to ask your own questions or lob them, this doesn't have to be me leading the way, but I will. But as far as where we are in the class, we're shifting from, we've done history, some current tensions and trends and topics, and we just took a hard look at external quality assurance, and now they're starting to shift. And this week we're going to be starting to look a bit more into the internal quality assurance picture, which gets a little more interesting, because external, there are very well, some folks said not explicit enough, but there's clear and transparent standards and criteria, right? And that is publicly posted. This is what you have to align to or try and fit towards or justify. But when it comes to internal, just like one's definition of quality, it can wildly vary. And so any thoughts on, even from your perspective, like common tropes, problems, stressors with internal quality assurance?
Yes. So I think, and Paul, you mentioned the kind of the narrative and you're coming up on your HLC visit. I love Lee Schulman did this Change magazine article in like the 90s, maybe. I don't know. I'll find it and I'll send it to Joe and he can share with you, where he was talking about that being accountable is actually the narrative act of giving an account. Like, what have I been doing? Why have I been doing this stuff? And that he got it because his daughter was in accounting school and she was talking about her classes that she was taking, which was all about the story that you have to make behind numbers. It's not about these numbers or putting this stuff up, but it's like, how do you tell a coherent narrative about what you're doing and why, for the type of institution you are, for the students that you serve, and like what it is that you're trying to do. And internally, I think we're pretty good at doing that externally because we have to, and try to get other people that aren't familiar to understand what we're doing and then hopefully give us meaningful feedback and opportunities to improve. Or we need to get really good at doing that to protect ourselves from what might be coming as part of that review process. But internally, we are less likely to get clear on the narrative that we tell ourselves about why we do the things that we do. And we sort of default into, if we get thorough processes in place, that somehow keeps us assuring quality. So you'll see a lot of things that we build out. And it was great to come into sort of the like Robert's Rules of Order conversation, where we're like, okay, we'll send things through committee structure. And because it's sort of gone through this committee process and review, and we followed these particular rules, like, and it came out on the other side, we're going to be like, it's good. But that may or may not be the case. And we sort of lose why we created certain committees, why we have different people that were put on them at certain times to participate, or what role or lens I'm supposed to be bringing to that conversation and thinking about. So we sort of have this ongoing processes and committee structures that we have of like, we're going to review curriculum, right? How do we know that something can be approved to be in here or even count as like a transfer course, or that it can get credit? And we have all these structures by which these things get approved. And if they've met all of that approval criteria, I apologize, let me get out of that email so you don't hear that ding constantly going. That's my inbox, and it's not pretty. It's like that all day. And sometimes I just walk away from it because I don't want to. Thank you for understanding, Barbara. But I think that there's, as administrators and as leaders in higher ed, part of our ability to do internal quality assurance is helping people understand why we have different structures and processes in place and what those structures and processes are supposed to do. And that includes sort of like all throughout our hierarchy. So in assessment, for example, we work a lot with faculty and staff that are just like, I have no idea why they're making me fill out this form, or I don't know why I have to say how this connects to this piece of things in a course that I'm putting together. So you can't really get into sort of that I feel confident about we're assuring quality. We're just moving through the motions in some ways. We have processes, but are they really getting us to where we want to go? So I think one promise and pitfall of internal quality assurance is that we just get in this repetitive motion of doing. We don't know why. We don't know if it's actually doing what we initially wanted it to do. And we're really good at creating new structures. We're not so great at re-evaluating and like getting rid of structures. So it's like, well, we have this committee and they've always done this, so we'll just keep them. Or like, we've always done this process this way, and it's just easier to do that and then layer on this other thing. And it complicates all of these layers to pieces. So that's another sort of area of pitfall, is we need to take a look at before we add something to, what might we take away, or what do we need to repurpose, or what do we need to reevaluate that doesn't make sense for us now. On other things that sort of happen internally on quality assurance, you've got the big three: program review, strategic planning, evaluation of faculty and staff, and sort of what that entails. And those are all sort of related to how we say, you know, we've got good people doing the right things for our students, and they're credentialed in ways to do that, and we review that our programs are relevant and offering things in meaningful ways for students. We're not, you know, setting them up for failure. And then as an institution, we're trying to move to these ends, and we do a lot of like student surveys. We look at benchmarks. We're like, what are they doing? How does that look in relation to us? And all of these pieces. And I think at the part of it is do you really feel more confident about your quality at the end of all of that? Barbara says no. So I would, but it's important, and we have all these processes in part. This is where your internal and external kind of hit each other, because accreditors and others want to see, like, what are your processes for doing this? And you're like, I've built these processes, and it runs internally. But oftentimes internally, we have this disconnect between the things that we do that actually we find value in and make us feel confident and decent about what's happening in our institutions, and then the stuff that we are sort of operating on processes and practices, and sometimes these connect and sometimes they don't. And it's a fascinating way to think about studying, but I'll pause there because that's going to go off in different places. And I would love to hear though, Barbara, if you have experiences or thoughts on anything that I've mentioned so far.
I think assessment is an ongoing challenge for me at my institution, in the idea of it's a compliance issue and not ingrained as much as I would like it to be. It's getting better by tiny increments, but even that improvement was because we almost lost our HLC accreditation due to assessment. So it was spurred by that, and we had all this momentum. I think Dr. Levy, I even wrote in one of my notes, like, I kind of miss those days where we had that momentum of fear because we were going to lose accreditation. And it really made everybody feel so much more urgent and intense about it. And then once we got a clean bill and they said, oh, your program's model now, everybody was kind of like, we're done. And so it's like what you said, like, you can have great processes, but I don't think it's internalized yet. I don't think people understand that this means assurance of quality, and that we're doing it because it's important to our students and the institution, and not because we have to.
Paul, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Paul, you have.
Yeah, no, Barbara and I can finish each other's sentences.
Yeah.
We go back and forth, and each post is just ditto. You know, you're living in my world. It's this exact same thing. We've been down for assessment issues repeatedly, and then finally they said, all right, we're done with this. You guys are on like every kind of monitoring visit we can have, and all sorts of reports and stuff. And faculty finally came together and found religion, and it was great. We thought we're going to assume zero-based knowledge, because we thought some of the pushback we get on this is just people masking that they don't know what they're talking about, right? So we're just going to make it safe for everybody to have no knowledge whatsoever of assessment, start everybody at ground zero and just build up from there. And that seemed to work very well. But then once everybody kind of got it and was moving along, it started to fall apart. And now we're back in that place where, you know, Barbara and I were talking, we're writing it into the contract to force people to do it. And it's never a carrot. It's always a stick. Yeah. You know, I tell Joe that in our one-on-one that people write these very basic assessment plans, and they meet them easily. So the outcomes are really simple to get. And then rather than doing assessment to improve, they're just doing assessment to show that they're doing assessment. So it's just busy work. So they're not seeing any reason to do it. So it's not any added value for them. And then they want to get paid extra for it. And they've missed the whole point. And our deans are so busy doing administrative stuff that I would rather have them asking for improvements and driving with their questioning some of these assessment activities. And that's not happening. And I'm just going down a rabbit hole here. But I think it happens a lot.
Yeah, well,
for sure.
No, I not that it's helpful, but you are not alone. And so one of the things that we would also get at the National Institute is we get a lot of phone calls of people being like, like I'm on like version 2.0 of what I'm trying to do with assessment. Like I thought we had this locked in and like now it's going sideways. And I think there's a variety of reasons why we end up in that space. And some of it has been that our quality assurance processes and focusing on assessment in particular is often done for us or for someone else. So it's either like I'm doing this for the institution, or I'm doing this because HLC wants me to, or I'm doing this because Paul called and said that I have to turn in my report. And we become our student and we're like, how many pages does it need to be? Like, what do you want to see? We are like the bare minimum of our assignment to pass, like all of our like critical thinking, problem solving, like it goes out the window as faculty. And we're like, tell me what you need so I can pass this and move on with my day. Which positions it as completely divorced from teaching and learning, which any good instructional designers, any good like curriculum job, I'm sure you know, Jamie, are like, no, this is an integral part of educational design. But it gets this very external add-on piece when it's viewed as compliance. And some of this is really well earned. So when you look at kind of the arc of assessment over time, you had where originally, well, it depends on when you want to be like, I'm going to start tracking assessment. But if you think about the kinds of things that are like, I'm improving my practice as a faculty member, as a staff member, if I'm offering an educational opportunity, are students getting out of it what I want them to have? That's been going on for years. You had writing across the curriculum, you had rubric development in like the 20s and 30s, all faculty led, and it was great and fun. And you're like, yeah, this is lovely. And then in 1980s, US Department of Education, like bless their hearts, decided to write in a letter from the secretary that like, maybe accreditors should take a look at like some of this stuff. And so then you have these state mandates that come in and you have accreditation mandates that are like, show me what you're doing in assessment. So the first iteration of most institutions in assessment was like, I don't know, just put some learning outcomes together, throw it in some stuff and like, see if that does what they want it to do, right? Because a lot of times mandates come in and we're like, what do you want to know about? And they're like, I don't know. I think I have this need as a state. Maybe this is good data for it. And you're like, okay, fine, here, have what you need and let me go back to like doing what I want. So faculty remember the first time around when they were putting stuff in, or 10 years ago when they like did their first gen ed learning outcomes and like nobody remembers why, but it was written sort of for another audience, not for students, not to really be making sense to inform my teaching or my design. And they remember how like it didn't work and then that nobody asked them about it. So we sort of got to do it. And nobody said anything to them about it for years. And we come back being like, this is different this time. And it's, no one believes us. No one believes when we come back and say like, actually, no, we want it to be about this. And yes, and faculty also know that like we can outweight an administrator. And if we just let it go, it'll be fine. So then it becomes accreditation has to be like, knock, knock, knock. Where are you at? Like, get it together. And so this cycle repeats in this very negative way. And then you add on this sort of third layer of peer review to it, where in the standards, there are not things that have like, you need this mix of indirect and direct, or you need to see these types of learning outcomes, or I need to see these elements. Yet in the feedback that institutions get, it's I'm digging you because you don't have the right mix of direct and indirect, and you don't have this right thing. So then institutions get into this like, well, what do you want to see? And what are the pieces that I need to pass this? I will build that in and make this happen, which reinforces the whole like piece of these parts. So you've got a peer review external training issue on sort of norms that have gotten embedded in the peer review system that are just not standard driven, but practice informed for some bizarre reasons. SACS COC is notoriously difficult. I'll say it's my polite word for that in this area. And so it leads to all of this institutional behavior. I mean, it's a great way to think about a lever for change. Like, how do you get people to do something that you want them to do without writing it down on paper? Like, I think it's a great indirect behavior drive. But it makes it really hard when you're trying to say, no, actually, we want to do this internally. And it doesn't matter what we do, like do the things that work for you. And we'll figure out how to write this narrative and make an account of it to our accreditors. If the accreditor says, actually, no, we need you to do this in a particular way. And we're going to host an academy where you can come and learn how to do it. And you feel like, now I got to pay you for you to tell me what I got to do to pass. doesn't this seem shady? And it does seem shady. You're not wrong. So we talked about it a lot at the Institute, is sort of the lenses that we bring to this work and how we can do framing. We put together like communication toolkits, like how do you talk about the value and the importance of it? How do you think about messaging, where messages come from, when they come, the language related to it in ways that don't make it just like it's reporting time again, but like thinking about how are you thinking about this in relation to your syllabus, or like what worked for you this term, what assignments were making sense, like what questions do you have about your practice, do we need to change something based on our student populations, like question based instead of show me things in some ways, but that communication piece often missing in the part. So we put that together. But we also gave what I like to call these Cosmo versions or Cosmo quizzes of what are the lenses that people bring to this work. And so they're like 1-page statements of belief. And there's one for student affairs and there's one for academic affairs, because language is, while the things are the same, language is sometimes different. And people are like, that's not my word. I want to see my word in there. So that you could say, not, I think these things are happening, but do I agree? Do I believe this statement to be true? How much do I agree with these statements? To see if you fall into assessments and measurement exercise, where you get faculty that are like, look, if I can't do a pre-post, like there's no point to do it. Or I know my program is 2 people, but that end size is way too small for me to make action. And you're like, that's your whole program? That is 2 people. Like those are real people that you're looking at being like, it's too bad. Go forth in the world, right? Like, so the measurement side of things, if that's sort of driven in how you're thinking about assessment, it's really hard to have a teaching and learning conversation if someone's stuck on assessment is actually a measurement exercise, and it's as difficult and high stress as empirical research, okay? It's also really hard to have a conversation with someone if they're compliance oriented. So they're like, this is just about reporting. I give you a bunch of data. Nobody knows where it goes. It doesn't matter what I write on this form, and I just have to check this box. And if you want to say like, let's talk about our culture or an improvement, like they're missing you. It's going to be ships passing in the night. Where we do get a lot of traction is on sort of the other 2 lenses, which is a teaching and learning lens, which says this is actually about my pedagogical practice and questions that I have about, am I being effective as a teacher? So is what I'm doing working for students? If I do this, are students able to talk about it when they leave? Particularly in our community colleges, they step in, they step out, they take things in like interesting ways. Like, do you know what you got from this class? Do you know how to talk about your learning? Are you even aware that you're learning these things? And I would tell this story about back like when we would fly on planes pre-pandemic, and you would talk to the person next to you instead of being like, I don't know, are you these, like maybe we should put a wall here. That I'm the chatty person. If you sit next to me on plane, I'll be like, what do you do? Where are you going? You're like trying to put an earbud in, and I'm like, so those are cute earbuds. Where'd you get them? Like, I'll just keep bothering you. And it would normally get to, I would talk about working at this National Institute, and I would frame it as I work at this place where we study how do you know if students learn anything in college? Like, that was a lot easier than getting into assessment. People have really strong feelings, and it's very test oriented. When you say assessment, they're like, and they throw me off a plane. So I would just talk about, I'm studying how do you know students learn anything in college? Without fail, the people sitting next to me would be like, yeah, I learned nothing. Like, I have no idea. Like, I'm just glad I got through. And as the conversation would go on, they'd start to say all these things like, I have great information literacy skills. I have wonderful quantitative reasoning. I'm a great problem solver. I have leadership skills. I have all these very specific trade related competencies that I can do and certifications. And they felt like they got that in spite of us. That like somehow, while we were asking them to jump through these hoops, they acquired these knowledge and skills and competencies that we'd actually designed our education around. Like, there's a reason we're asking you to do this stuff. Sometimes we're like, I don't know, just have them do this. But most often, I like to think we have intentional design behind the types of things that we're doing. And if our students have no idea, and they come in, they come out, and they're talking about the value, like they can't speak about it, they can't advocate for it, and they can't have a conversation with a faculty member on, I don't understand, like I was trying to figure out how I'm getting this. Or how does this knowledge apply in these ways? And how am I thinking about that? And getting a student having a conversation about their learning learning outcomes and assessment with a faculty member is much more helpful than us having a conversation with a faculty member about like, how are you assuring quality and how are you doing this work? And so movement happens sort of within the assessment field. You're also getting like a mini history right now, a little tour of movement over time, to really say, how do we leverage student agency to give them like, what are the questions you should be asking faculty about the courses that you take? What are the questions you should be asking about learning experiences that you have or that are provided to you? How should you be asking about what you're doing in work that connects with what you're doing over here, and really think about starting to drive that so they become a much more driving force than us trying to drag people across the line. And we get faculty coming in saying, oh, I have questions about like my curriculum, or I have questions about this assignment or this task. Let's talk about that, about how to get this to my students, instead of let's talk about your assessment report and move in that way. It's sneaky, it's subtle, but most good leadership is underwater currents that are moving people along. So teaching and learning is another lens. That student-centered lens is one that's really sort of like, the students are the ones that will learn. They will come in and out. We want them to be lifelong learners. The way that students engage with education is just fundamentally different in a lot of ways now, and their stress levels and mental health and all kinds of things that go along that mean that we need to think differently about how we're not just giving them bite-sized credentials and credentialing pieces, but enabling them to walk away knowing that I have evidence that I can do this and this is what I can do. And that's embedding assurance into a course through assignments, which is something that faculty fundamentally care about. Like, what's an assignment that I'm giving to my students is really the instance of this, and which ones matter for employers or other community members, and which ones matter just for us in academia. Like, for instance, I bet Joe loves to give you academic papers where you have to use APA to cite things. And he's like, excellent, you will suffer. No, that's not at all what he says. But it's part of that, like, that's what we want to see in writing. We're like, I love APA. I want to see citations and references. No one outside of academia cares. Like, that's not a thing that matters. Other type of writing, you know, if you're writing a blog post, you're writing an email, you're trying to figure out, like, how are you writing a memo in a council meeting? Like, none of these things play in. And yet we default to the ways that we're assuring writing by saying, put together a paper for me. And so thinking about, how do we merge and make relevant ways that we can do those assignments for students, and which evidence matters for which audiences? When is this higher ed related? When is this helpful for transfer? When is this helpful for workforce? When is this just helpful as a student to like engage in things? Can be a great way to make our evidence speak to different audiences, and then also get faculty more engaged and interested in how I'm living this in my day-to-day interactions and my work with students, and takes it away from some of those like, but is it measurement related? No, it's about teaching, and how am I making sure that like Valerie's set up for success in this assignment, or that Barbara knows that I'm throwing this out here and it's supposed to be a struggle because I want to see if you can figure out how to do it, you know, and that I'm making those pieces transparent in that way. And that was a long, winding response and commentary. So I'll pause there, put a pin in it, and say comments or thoughts or reactions. I also take complaints, so that's fine too.
One thing that I'll just throw out that I think can be a through line with something you already said, two things you already said, as well as then what Paul and Barbara were talking about, is this idea of higher ed just marching forward, and that there's so little opportunity and emphasis of, we are going to pause, we're going to pull our heads back, we're going to zoom out and look at what we're doing and how all these things fit together. And you know, I think that aligns with your point of, you know, so rarely are we always talk about adding, but we're not talking about what we're going to take away. And so the same thing is true with, if we're going to be doing this, if we're going to be launching this new program, if we're going to be dedicating our resources and energy towards this, you know, and for Paul, like, we're all throwing in on accreditation because HLC is coming up. If we are dedicating more time and energy there, where are we losing our time and energy for other things? Because nobody is getting paid enough to do all of the things. And so where are they going to scale back? What does that mean? And And is it a temporary thing that we're willing to accept, or is it a permanent thing? Like, you now have this responsibility,
Yeah.
and you're just going to have to divide your time accordingly. And I think too about like, having had some facilities work in the past in my career, like I think about deferred maintenance from a quality assurance perspective, and how quality assurance is this afterthought, right? Because we're thinking, and this is happening at NLU right now. We're launching this brand new program that's building off of the same model of this other program that is in flames. And it's in flames for good reason, because they're not doing any assessment program review. They're not doing like the normal stuff that we do for quality assurance. And so on the one hand, they're like, how do we fix this? But on the other hand, they are charging forward with the exact same playbook for another program. And it's like, do you not see those are competing priorities and how we should figure out the one before the other? But it's this idea of they're just thinking of what's coming next. What do I need to do? And so I think about too, one of the things I like to have the conversation with the faculty or staff who are pushing back on assessment is, and not in a gotcha way, but like truly trying to understand why. What are their reasons for pushing back? I mean, my dissertation was on this, where 9 times out of 10, it's not at all about assessment. It's about the fact that they are doing all of the things and they don't have and so then assessment comes and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm barely keeping my head above water with X, Y, and Z. How, and that's when they do the perfunctory reports and they're like, here you go. I met my targets. There we go. But it's because we're not taking the time and letting people know it's okay to pause and have an actual good conversation about things and really think through changes we can potentially be making to systems and structures, and letting them know like these structures can change. Unlike a lot of aspects of higher ed, like we can make these things change. But I think, a lot of times it's a question of, do people have time and energy to do it? And it's the one thing that I always commit to with my team, or even just myself, of like, I will do the work. Like I will let you adapt to your assessment template and report and whatever to your format, because I don't want format to be a barrier. I don't want, any little thing to be. I will do the work to pull that together and make it consistent across the university, because I'm willing to do that for, to remove that barrier for you and still maintain quality assurance. But I have found that level of commitment to care for other parties, as well as keeping quality assurance top of mind, is not a common trait for higher education leaders. And I see Natasha's just
all of that is true. I'm sorry. I'm going to tell you what I'm putting in here, and then I'm going to also comment on Joe's great parts. So I put in the philosophy activity, the academic, and the student affairs. So you've got links to that. Then I put in 3 papers. So we had these occasional papers that became way more than occasional. So, but we never changed the name. One is about that move from like assessment in one version into a way that we need to think about how to make it embedded, and it's an institution sharing what that process was in the journey and kind of how they went about doing it. That might maybe just be therapeutic, but also a nice read for folks engaged in this work. The other 2 are faculty specific. One was written by a historian of academic freedom and faculty unions. And we said, tell us what the relationship is between academic freedom and assessment. Like, you tell us, this is your area of expertise, not an assessment person. And wrote this wonderful paper that I'm always like, here, read this, and then let's have a conversation, like slide things under doors or put things in there. And then the other one was a paper from faculty unions and about sort of where they see assessment in relation to that and as part of the role. And so those might be helpful as you're going through, but definitely other resources are available and I'm happy to share. But to the point about like scaling back and pause, I can honestly say, and we looked at so much like what's going on in accreditation. We worked with all the regional accreditors, still do, in sort of providing help with assessment and helping them rethink it, and also support institutions and try to deal with some of this disconnect in the peer review cycle. And I cannot point to a place that without explaining why they were taking a pause, an institution did not get in trouble for saying, we need a timeout. Like, we need to stop. And I need to not do this. Like, we have this thing where it's like, it has to be happening on a year. I don't know about you and like our other structures that we have in institutions, but a lot of our decision-making doesn't happen in a year. The things that we're trying to do, like, our cycles don't really line up with the reality of how we work and how we move and how we think about things and the discussions that we have. But there's this fear, Barbara, back to your point of like, back when you're like, oh, they're coming and like, we have to do this. And you know, there's a person in a trench coat on our quad, like staring at us. We're like, get the reports together. But that you can totally take a pause. We can extend things out. You can have, we collect data and then we stop and we look at it. Cause I know that when I'm like, oh, here's this results and here's what I'm going to do about it, and I throw it in, you're not getting a good, thoughtful response from me that's having a conversation about how does this fit with our mission? How does this fit with what we're trying to do as a program? Is this relevant for where we are with our employer partners? Does this work for our students? Like, all of those things that should be part of our quality assurance related conversations don't happen in the speed of our cycles. We can slow those down, we can extend them out. But we can also take pauses and say, we have way too much stuff and we need to work our way through it. We need space for conversations. We need time for dialogue. Here's how we're going to set that up and here's what we're going to do. And that's where a narrative becomes so key to giving us that cover to do that work. If we can't explain why we're doing something, questions will be asked. If we have clarity on why we're doing what we're doing, you can get away with a lot of things, but you can also pause and have that time to engage in it. And even if it's sort of the, well, if we stop doing it, we're not going to get them to do it again. If we stop doing it, maybe we'll get them to do it in a way that's meaningful when they come back. And that might be better than just going about doing it. The other thing that I would say to all of this is, if you are not a peer reviewer for your accreditation region, there's no time like the present to join and do this, so that you could be the person on these committees being like, time out, what are you doing? That's not in the standard. Like, don't pay this forward to other people just because it happened to you. Like, that's bullying, and we don't want to perpetuate this cycle of this relationship with things. And so I serve as a peer reviewer for various regions because if I have a mouth problem. I like to say things that I see that are problems that gets me into situations. But I think it's great for us, to see what are those conversations behind the scenes? How do they work? It eases our sort of concern as we're preparing for an accreditation visit. But it also allows you to stop some of these things or question it or put pins in the cycle of moving it around and engaging with it. The other thing that I wanted to find as a resource from this conversation, and this is totally a selfish plug because I wrote this book, but I was like, you should use my book. This would be really helpful. And I'm happy to say I have PDFs of this, I think, and I'll find it and I can send it to you. So I did a book, Degrees That Matters, moving to a learning systems paradigm. This was research we did with 800 institutions. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it was super interesting and really helpful, but it's so much information. It's insane. And we were looking at, there were institutions that were trying to figure out, like, how do we get everyone in our institution to build towards common shared goals? In some ways that had been happening, like with degree profiles, like what are we all trying to do? But it's still the same thing of like, if we have shared things that if you are a student here, we want you to experience or leave with, or there's something about you being here that's related to our values and mission. How do we figure out how people connect to and fit into that? Some were successful, some were not, but we looked across when they were trying to do this over a period of like 7 years and put together what happened at the places that did get movement and what was missing at the places that didn't. And Linda has 5, but I've got 4. So, and Lindsay and I we'll have a nice conversation one day. But thinking about the transparency, consensus, alignment, and student-centered were the 4. And I'll give you the short rundown version of it. So on consensus, oftentimes in higher education, we get stuck in like getting to where everyone fully agrees and feels good about a decision. It's impossible. It's impossible. Like, we need to let it go. We need to like put it in a balloon, go out in the parking lot and like set it free. We like watch it fly away. We're like, oh, that was nice. all that we need to get to is, do we actually have a shared understanding? And that's what we're talking about with consensus. Like, I can see how, you know, I disagree with it. I've said how I have differences in it, but I understand where we're trying to go. And that's key to any of this work. And so it's not, we're all cool with that, but we have a shared understanding. We have consensus around what are we trying to achieve for our students at different points in time. And there are many ways to think about doing that, but it's also sort of freeing to not be like, and I got to drag, you know, that one faculty member that's always like, I'm just going to object to this. Or that one student affairs person that's like, well, I'm always going to ask this question. Like, no, that's cool. Play your part and do that. But do you see how, do you still get the shared piece that we're going to? So that's consensus. Transparency then is also like, you got to tell people about the stuff. We can't just be like, well, that happened. Nice. Sort of like what we do with students in our syllabi all the time, where we're like, you saw it on the first day of class. Clearly, you remember it as clear as today. And you're like, no, I have no idea. What are you talking about? Like, this is not related to me. So we have to keep telling people, when I ask you to do this, it's for these reasons. Same thing with administrators when we're talking to our staff. When I ask you to be in this meeting, it's for these reasons, and I'm trying to get this thing out of it. When I want you to do this work, it's for these reasons, and we're trying to get to this. Like, help them get clarity and connect those dots. And you can sound like a broken wheel. You should, or a broken record. Which one is it? Whatever those phrases are, you understand. Make it internal to you, and figure out how to make that clarity so we keep saying the same thing. Consistency of narrative, so important for us to feel like we're part of the same organization. If I'm getting different narratives from different places, or, you know, Paul told me one thing, and then Barbara told me something else, and then Jamie told me this, I'm like, I don't know, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And that's a problem. We don't want that. And so consistency of narrative, say the same thing, even when you get up and they know, like, oh, Paul's going to talk and he's going to say this, this, and this. That is great. That is perfect. That's what you want, because that means you're on message, you're on point, you're saying the same thing. The framing doesn't change. People know where they stand in relation to it. Alignment, third one, which is, how do the pieces fit together? And now, not everything that we do will align to something else. Some things we just do because it's cool. Some things we just do because it's responsive and it's needed. Some things we just do in an event because it seems nice or people were interested. But if it's something that we say, doing this is related to the shared outcomes that we have, in what way and how? And that alignment piece is that thread of how we start to get our quality assurance narrative together. So if I ask you to do this and participate, it's because I think we believe as an institution that it's important for students to have these experiences, because from having those experiences, these kinds of things happen, which is related to this outcome that we want, right? So it unpacks sort of our theory of change or evidence link or whatever you want to call it underneath why we do these things. And if you get into that and you realize we don't know, that's a great opportunity for a conversation to say, maybe we take this away, or maybe we repurpose this, or let's come back to think about, like, what were we trying to do when we did this the first time, or put this requirement in, or why did we not require this? And have those conversations. And then the last thing is student-centered, because so much of our work has been institution-centered, faculty-centered, accreditor-centered, someone else centered, and then we're like, come on, students, jump through these hoops. And they're like, are you freaking kidding me? There's this beautiful, it's horrifying, but it's a beautiful visual of in Ohio, they looked at data about from a student that is interested in coming to a community college, from the day that they're interested, like, maybe I'll go, to when they first show up at a course. And it looks like a game of chutes and ladders. Like when they put together the movement, how students go through, and it was so haphazard, like happenstance. Like, maybe if you get Joe, you can advance, but if you get Natasha, like, you're out of luck. Or depending on where you started, how you did things, they set it up where it was if you were in developmental ed, you got like 1 die. And if you weren't, you got 2, and moved through, and they played this game as part of this faculty staff development. And they're like, these are our students. This is what they do and experience before they even get to that first opportunity to learn. But they've been learning this whole time about navigating and how to do all these things, because we've structured stuff not with our students in mind. So thinking about, where can we leverage our relationships with students? Where can we think about where student voice is louder than our voice and should be in certain moments in time? And how are we ensuring that as we're building things out, we're building things that aren't going to be harder for our students to move through, but will actually line up with who our students are and what they need and how they move, which is easier said than done. But I think if we think and sort of about, like, in our quality assurance, Does this make sense for our students? Are we setting them up for success? Do we understand how these pieces connect? Are we making us, these pieces clear? And do we have a shared place of where we're going? Start to make us feel better internally that we are doing some of this work in meaningful ways, and getting to that quality. And I will pause there while I find that Ohio piece and allow you all to comment. So,
Well, I know Barbara at one point had her hand raised. I don't know if she still has her question or comment.
I was just trying to figure out how we get permission to pause. And I think that's where I really struggle. It just feels like initiatives and mandates and grants and everything are just constantly thrown at us at a pace that is exhausting. And saying that you need a minute is sometimes viewed as weakness or defeat. Like, why can't you get it all done? Why can't you do everything? And so, I don't know. I know it's weird because like I'm at the level where I can give some permission, but I have people above me who have to give me permission to pause. So it does get a little exhausting.
Valerie, I saw you on mute, so I want to know what you have to say, but I will just quickly say though, that it is so much more important now than ever before for us to pause for our staff, because we are losing so many good people because they are overstressed and overworked. We already had folks that were working 4 jobs and now they're working 8, right? You had 3 hats and now you got 7. And then you're like, but if I could leave, then none of this stuff gets done. And so there's this additional layer of pressure. And so some of this can be using national data to talk about how we need to do something locally in relation to that. I think getting a good, I'm going to throw in a link to a ComSing that has this like value proposition elevator exercise. I think if you can answer the questions that are in that as part of the pitch you make for our need to pause, then you're in a better place to go. But I think we don't need to ask permission from our accrediting agencies to pause. We do need to get our internal leadership comfortable that that's okay. And when they have been living in a constant state of fire and fear, there is always an emergency going on. Like your fight or flight is off the charts. And so having things coming where you've got the full like, and these institutions did it and they were better for it. And now they're this national example, like all of those pieces that kind of help address the concerns that will come up can get you where you want to go. But Valerie, what do you want to say?
You actually commented on the part that I was going to focus on, that it's so important to change the perception on pausing, because right now, when you even think of suggesting a pause, it's confused with, it's taken out of context. It's confused with non-compliance or refusal to comply, or I don't want to be a part of this process. It's got a negative connotation to it. Whereas in reality, sometimes we're just overloaded and we need to take that step back and refocus and reprioritize and look at the bigger picture, because I called it falling down the rabbit hole. We fall down the rabbit hole all the time. And then sometimes it's a little bit simpler than what we've made it out to be. So we need that time to pause, and we need that time, or sometimes we just need to reassess what it is that we're really doing. And the reassessment gives you a clearer perception. But because, like you said, the executive teams are under the gun and they feel pressured, and in some instances, they've waited until the very last minute. So now they do feel like they're under the gun. That's something that I've experienced here at my institution, where because of turnover or reduction in forces or what have you, the people that started the process are not here. And sometimes they took a little longer to get to it than they wanted to. So now you do feel that pressure, and now you do feel that stress. So the whole thought of pausing mentally, it's not an option.
So, I agree with all of that. And I apologize because I was looking up the toolkit that I wanted to throw in here as a link. And then I will find the Ohio one. part of our administration as we think about like, what does it mean to be a good leader in higher education today? What does it mean to be an advocate for quality assurance is more important than sort of what are our quality assurance processes. Because we are at this moment in time where we need to be reevaluating what we're doing. We need to have time built in for reflection. We need to have time where we're also checking in with our staff to say, is this working for you? Is this things that are mattering for your places? Some ways into this are asking some culture surveys. You can get to some of these pieces, but what it requires of each of you, and it's you because you're here, so thank you for being here and being part of this program, is that political savviness of to say, when you're talking about this new initiative, we're actually going to frame it as it's the same as this initiative that we're doing. It's an added layer to it. Let's not make another thing. Let's think about how we collapse these together, and how can we think about branding, framing, all of these pieces that make it not, and now we also do this, and now we have a different committee that looks at that too. But how can we say we're layering on now an examination of like the financial policies that we put around this as part of our student success or whatever it might be. And that recommendations for that come out in grants. And if part of that process is, if you can't tell me when we get started on something, how it fits or connects to something that we're already doing, then you have a higher burden of proof to justify that we should be doing that right now. Because we do a lot of bandwagon jumping. We do a lot of, they're doing what? We should do that too. Places which in the realm of quality assurance, which is allegedly very mission driven, goes counter to how we should be making decisions and choices about, does this work for us? And is this something that we need to be putting our time on now? Now, that's easy for me to say. It's harder for you to ask those questions of your administrators. It's very difficult to do that. And this is where thinking about where are your allies throughout an institution that can ask questions on behalf of you, where you can use like, interesting, other data nationally says this, or like, weird, I heard this from students, like, where are you getting these kinds of things from? Like, the ways in which you can use other sources of information to provide not misdirection, but a little bit of like troubleshooting around some of these places can be helpful, but your political context and your leadership situation better than I do. And some of that will work and some of it will not. Some of our leaders that came in are like, I'm here to turn this institution around. And like, I'm just going to do a bunch of stuff and they're going to leave. And they will, because you look at the rate at which people stay, our leaders, administrators stay, it is getting less and less every year. Like, it's crazy. We used to have these like, we're going to stay for 7 years. You're like, oh, good, consistency. Like, let's do it. Now they're like, I do like 2, 3, and I do some stuff here. I don't even stay to see if it works. And then I use that to like jump to this other place to do things. And then you've got like the Pauls and Barbaras that are like, I'm assuming you're like, I've been here at this institution. I've been doing this stuff for a hot minute. I know how we get things to move inside. And you always need somebody that knows how to get things to move inside, right? To actually be an effective leader above, because every institution is slightly different. How you get movement internally, you can say a lot of things, but it won't actually happen on the ground unless you've got your inside person that gets it to move. We don't have to make it move. We could be like, of course I'll do that for you. And then you go about your day. I'm not saying lie, but like, do it slower, slow it down, put it into a thing where it's going to go, stick it in that committee where it will die. Like, these are okay things to do. I will just say, and you don't have to take that as sort of like your lessons from Joe's class. But I think the more that we can not only enable our students to have agency and be part of our solutions, the more that we can regain agency that we have given up when we have institutional knowledge and care in a way that maybe some of our leadership have yet to acquire. Can that be a part of our responsibility and duty? I don't know. Maybe it can. The link that I shared about the piece, the important part is like sides or page 6 and 7 that has the, how do you talk about anything? And this could be used, you could use this for anything. Well, this is about assessment. You could do this with anything. So basically you provide context. What is it? So what's the background? Where did this come from? And what is it that you're talking about? And whether that's like, we need to take a data pause, or we want to take an annual year, or we want to do a reevaluation of whatever this might be. Like, this came from here and it's related to that. And we think it's important for strategic plan. That's it. move into problem identification, which is like, well, what is this actually trying to address, or what does this do? This is the so what question. You're like, so what's the thing? So what am I asking you about this? This is like basic comps kind of stuff. And then how does what I'm proposing help? What value does it add? How does it help us solve this problem? How are we seeing this as a mechanism to get forward? And then address those concerns and misperception. Like, I know you're thinking this, and it's not that. Or I know you probably have this concern, and here's how that's been successful in the past. And so you've got that sort of, let me get out ahead of the things that you know are coming, because you probably know what those might be. And then when this depends, this is more important as you get into different layers of people that do the work. What does this mean for me? What do I need to do? And if as a leader, it's, I just need you to give me the permission to pause. That's the ask. Like, what is that end final ask that I'm asking for you? If it's a faculty member, I need you to think about how you're doing an assignment differently. And of course, like whatever that, how does this relate to me? How does this impact me? What do you need me to do? Get those elevator speeches that are backed with some data and examples and pieces to help you move in that direction. But that's the toolkit. I'll find the Ohio one. I think we're at time.
Yep. Thanks so much, Natasha. Always a pleasure. And
Thanks.
thanks classmates who were able to attend and ask questions and engage. And for those who will be watching from home, hope you enjoyed the session. I'll be sure when I post the session to share out the resources that Natasha was sharing in the chat so that you all can see that as well. But thank you all. And thanks again, Natasha. Have a great
Thank you
day,
so
everybody.
much.
Thank you all. You got this. It's going to be great. Thank you.
Bye all.